a very bad recession, possibly worse than 2008. There are financial panics and financial crises and liquidity crises, and there are recessions, some of which are severe. But they're two different things. 98 was an acute financial crisis with no recession. 2000 was a mild recession, but there was no severe financial crisis. Now, NASDAQ collapsed, but there wasn't a lot of leverage in NASDAQ. There was no contagion there. Yeah, if you owned, I think it was pets.com with the sock puppet, if you, JDSU, if you owned that stuff, you lost all your money. But it didn't spread because no banks failed, no major brokerages failed, et cetera. So in 1990, a mild recession, but no financial panic. October 19, 1987, interesting, stock market fell 22% in one day. Not a week or a month, but one day, down 22%. And that was a financial crisis, but there was no recession. So they're separate things. However, they can happen together. And 2008 was an example. There we had an acute financial crisis, and the names. Bear Stearns failed in March of 2008. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac failed in June of 2008. And Congress bailed them out. And I was working on the McCain campaign at the time, and I remember I was on a call, the economic team, and everybody was high-fiving, like, hey, the financial crisis is over. Now we can get back to talking about the Iraq War, which is what they really wanted to talk about. And I was, I guess I play my usual role of messing things up, but I said, hold on. I said, this isn't over. You're not going to make it to election day without a much bigger failure. And I didn't say like September 15th at midnight. That was Lehman Brothers. But everybody knew that Lehman Brothers was the weak link. They always had been. They were the weak link in 1998. So I said, you're not going to make it to election day without a major crisis. And so get your guy ready, come up with a 4-point plan. Doesn't matter what the points are, just make them up, But get the guy on the steps of the Treasury the day it happens to give the 4-point plan, and he'll reassure the American people, and you'll win the election. I was left off the call. I was not invited back. That was at a very short tenure as a political advisor. So then, sure enough, September 15th, the crisis comes. John McCain runs around like a chicken with his head off. He's, doesn't know what to do, barges into the White House, and President Bush said, well, we're in the middle of a campaign. I can't let McCain come in without bringing in Obama. So they did. They had McCain, Obama, Bush, and the economic advisors in the cabinet room. And Obama didn't know any more than McCain, but he was smart enough to keep his mouth shut. And people looked at it, and McCain looked scared, and Obama looked cool. And so if you look at the polls, that McCain was ahead in the polls until that weekend, and then Obama pulled ahead and stayed ahead and won the election. And that was the turning point. It was not Sarah Palin or the debates or all the things people in Washington weren't talking about. It was the financial crisis and McCain's kind of panicked reaction. So there we had both, and then Lehman Brothers, September 15th. And then Morgan Stanley was days away from collapsing. Dick Fuld kept calling John Mack to have Morgan Stanley bail out Lehman, and Mack's like, we're worried about Morgan Stanley. We're on the ropes now, and Goldman would not have been far behind, and so forth. And the Fed truncated that by making Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs bank holding companies. So then they could bail them out because they were banks. I've worked on Fed applications that took 2 years to get done. That was done in about 2 hours, but they can do what they want when they have to. But of course, there was a severe economic recession as well. But I would encourage analysts to separate those two things. Again, they came together. It was horrific, but they can happen separately. My point is, I go back a little further than you, Julia, and I remember 73, 74. Because I graduated in 1973, and then and so did my classmates. And a lot of them went to Wall Street. I went to graduate school, so I wasn't ready for the real world yet. So, but they all got jobs on Wall Street, and they all got fired like a year later or less, because the recession in 1974, caused by the Arab oil embargo and the quadrupling of oil prices, was horrible. That was the worst recession since the Great Depression at that time. Now, we've managed to top that record a few times since, but at the time, that was, stock market crashed, Unemployment spiked. I think so. All my friends lost their brand new jobs on Wall Street, but that was bad. 82 was a really bad recession, and that was the one that Volcker, induced, kind of doing what Jay Powell's doing today, by the way. And if you want to understand where we're going right now, I would look at that 1981-82 recession. That topped 74 in terms of the worst recession since the Great Depression. That was the worst recession until 2008. And it was induced by Fed, raising interest rates and causing demand destruction because Paul Volcker was out to destroy inflation. Paul Volcker, I spoke to him about this, he's been legendary ever since. And as it relates to today, and that was really your question, how do we put all this in context? It's important to remember Jay Powell is not an economist, he's a lawyer. And lawyers, one of the reasons people don't like lawyers is they actually think about things differently. You go to law school to kind of get brainwashed in a benign way. But they're better at looking at both sides of the issue. They tend to be, if you're Jay Powell, fairly articulate. Jay Powell's a Republican. And he's looking at his legacy and he's saying, do I want to be Arthur Burns, who was considered a great failure because he let inflation get out of control? Or do I want to be Paul Volcker, the man who is, considered a hero because he crushed inflation? Well, he'd rather be Volcker. That's kind of obvious, but let's remember the cost. Let's remember what happened to crush inflation. Unemployment was well over 10%. It was like 11 or 12%. This is in 1981, 82. Those are depression level unemployment rates. But inflation did come down, but basically had to trash the economy to do it. And Powell kind of said that may be what it takes. Maybe not that bad, but much higher unemployment and a severe recession. So far, what I just described is not the same as 2008. We may have a very bad recession, possibly worse than 2008, but just a recession.